Corporal Jake Rivers sat in the cold metal chair at the military processing center, rolling up his sleeve for what he thought would be the easiest part of his day. He'd done this before during basic training. Just a quick scan, a beep, and he'd be cleared for deployment. Nothing complicated. The technician handling his test was a young private named Beth Walsh. She looked tired, like she'd been scanning recruits all morning and wanted nothing more than her lunch break. She grabbed the handheld scanner from the desk, not even looking at Jake as she powered it on. The device hummed to life with its usual soft blue glow. Beth waved it over Jake's exposed forearm, her eyes already drifting toward the next person in line. Standard procedure. 5 seconds tops. Except the scanner didn't beep. Instead, it made a sound nobody in that room had ever heard before. A high-pitched shriek, like metal tearing apart. Beth jerked backward, nearly dropping the device. The blue glow turned violent red. Jake looked down at his arm, confused. Did I break it? But Beth wasn't listening. She was staring at her screen, her face going completely white. Around them, every computer monitor in the facility started flickering. Then they all went black at once. The overhead lights cut out, replaced by emergency reds that bathed everything in an eerie glow. Somewhere in the building, alarms started blaring. People started shouting. Other technicians jumped from their stations, trying to figure out what was happening. Jake stood up, heart pounding, wondering if this was some kind of drill. But the look on Beth's face told him it wasn't. She was scared. Really scared. Before anyone could explain anything, the doors burst open. 6 armed security guards rushed in, weapons drawn, moving with the kind of urgency Jake had only seen during combat drills. They surrounded him immediately. Hands where we can see them, the lead guard barked. His name tag read Morrison, and his hand was shaking on his rifle. Jake raised his hand slowly, completely lost. What's going on? What did I do? Nobody answered him. Morrison was speaking rapidly into his radio, using codes Jake didn't recognize. Then something appeared above Jake's head. A hologram, shimmering in the red emergency lighting. It was a symbol Jake had never seen before, but somehow it felt ancient. A golden phoenix with its wings spread wide, wrapped around 3 stars that seemed to pulse with their own light. The room went dead silent. Every person stared at the symbol, then at Jake, then back at the symbol. Morrison's radio slipped from his hand and clattered on the floor. An older officer pushed through the crowd, a major with gray hair and 3 decades of service ribbons on his chest. He stopped dead when he saw the hologram, his jaw dropping open. Sweet mother of... He whispered, unable to finish. Jake was getting frustrated now. Sir, can someone please tell me what's happening? The major finally looked at him, and Jake saw something in the man's eyes he'd never expected to see from a superior officer. Fear mixed with something else. Awe, maybe. Or disbelief. The major moved closer, studying Jake's face like he was seeing him for the first time. Son, he said quietly, his voice unsteady, do you know anything about your family history? Your ancestry? Jake shook his head. I grew up in foster care, sir. Never knew my real parents. The major nodded slowly, like that explained something. He gestured at the hologram still floating above Jake's head. That symbol right there. That's the royal seal of the Valtorian dynasty. The name meant nothing to Jake. He'd never heard it before in his life. The major continued, his words coming faster now. The Valtorians were the most powerful civilization this galaxy ever knew. They ruled over hundreds of systems, commanded fleets that could move stars. This was 10,000 years ago, before humans even had written language. Jake felt like he was in some kind of dream. This couldn't be real. The major wasn't finished. About 10,000 years ago, the entire Valtorian civilization vanished overnight. Every planet, every ship, every single member of the royal family. Gone. No explanation. No bodies. No trace. The galaxy's greatest mystery. He pointed at the symbol again. That seal only appears for one reason. Direct royal bloodline. And according to every database we have, that bloodline went extinct when the Valtorians disappeared. Beth finally found her voice, still staring at her dead computer screen. When I scanned him, it triggered something in the Galactic Genetic Registry. The whole system crashed. Not just here. Everywhere. Every military base, every government facility, every medical center in human space. The entire network went down. The major pulled out his personal communicator. His hand was trembling. It's not just human systems. I'm getting reports from our alien contacts. The KRYLL Confederation's databases crashed. The Methian Coalition. Even the Eldari, and their systems never crash. Jake felt his knees go weak. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of glitch. He was nobody. Just a kid from Detroit who joined the military because he had nowhere else to go. He wasn't royalty. He definitely wasn't some alien prince from a civilization that died before humans discovered fire. But the Major was already speaking into his communicator, and the words Jake heard made his blood run cold. This is Major Richard Stone at Processing Station 7. I need immediate connection to Earth Central Command. Priority Alpha clearance. A pause. Yes, I know what that means. I'm using it anyway. Another pause, longer this time. Sir, I need you to listen very carefully. The situation is code sovereign. Silence on the other end. Jake could hear shocked voices even through the small speaker. The Major's voice was steady now, accepting the impossible. I repeat, code sovereign. We have a living heir to the Valtorian dynasty. Yes, sir. He's human. He's standing right in front of me. The Major lowered the communicator and looked at Jake with an expression that mixed sympathy and something that might have been pity. Son, your life just changed in ways you can't even imagine. In about 5 minutes, this place is going to be crawling with every high-ranking official in Earth's military. And they're going to want answers you probably don't have. Jake tried to process it all. Tried to make sense of how a routine blood test had turned into whatever this was. Above his head, the golden phoenix continued to shine, marking him as something he never wanted to be. 24 hours had passed since Jake's blood test broke the galaxy, and he still couldn't wrap his head around any of it. They'd moved him under armed guard to Earth Central Command, a massive facility buried 2 miles beneath Geneva. The journey there had been surreal. Military transport, blacked-out windows, radio silence the entire way. Nobody would talk to him. Nobody would even look at him directly. It was like he'd become something other than human overnight. Now he sat in the largest conference room he'd ever seen, facing a semicircle of people and beings that represented power on a scale he couldn't comprehend. Human generals and politicians filled half the seats. The other half held aliens. Real aliens. Jake had seen pictures, of course, watched the news coverage when humanity made first contact 15 years ago. But seeing them in person was different. A reptilian creature with scales that shifted colors sat to his left. Across from him, something that looked like a floating jellyfish pulsed with bioluminescent light. There were others, shapes and forms that didn't fit into any category his brain understood. General Rebecca Stone sat at the center of the human delegation. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes that had seen combat on 3 different worlds. She'd been studying Jake since he entered the room, and he got the feeling she was trying to figure out if he was an asset or a problem. Next to her, Ambassador Patricia Cole handled humanity's relationship with alien governments. She looked nervous, which made Jake even more uneasy. The reptilian alien stood first. His voice came out as a series of clicks and hisses, but a translator device on the table converted it to perfect English. My name is Keth. I am the primary historian for the Dravian Collective. What I am about to tell you may be difficult to accept. Keth's scales shifted to a dark blue, which Jake's briefing packet said meant he was deeply serious. The Valtorian dynasty was the first great galactic civilization. They achieved faster-than-light travel when most species were still living in caves. At their height, they controlled 400 systems, maintained peace across a quarter of the galaxy, and possessed technology we still cannot replicate. Jake shifted in his seat. Everyone's eyes were on him. Keth continued, his translator making his words sound almost sad. 10,000 years ago, during an event we call the Great Silence, every Valtorian vanished in a single night. Ships found drifting empty in space. Entire planets evacuated with meals still on tables, as if everyone simply walked away mid-sentence. No bodies. No explanation. No trace of where they went or why. A human scientist Jake didn't recognize spoke up. We've been studying Valtorian ruins for decades. Their technology is so advanced that most of it still doesn't make sense to us. And their legal codes, their treaties, their governmental frameworks, those are still the foundation of current galactic law. The Valtorians built the structure that every civilization still uses. General Stone leaned forward. Here's what matters, Corporal. As a verified heir to the Valtorian royal line, you hold legal claims that supersede current treaties. Resource rights to systems we thought were unclaimed. Command codes to defense platforms we didn't even know existed. Access to weapons and technology that could tip the balance of power in this galaxy. Jake's mouth went dry. I don't want any of that. I just want to go back to my unit. Ambassador Cole gave him a sympathetic look. I'm afraid that's not possible anymore. 3 governments have already filed formal requests to meet with you. 2 more have suggested, diplomatically, that you should be kept in protective custody for your own safety. 1 species we won't name has implied that studying your genetic code could benefit everyone. The way she said studying made Jake's skin crawl. But it was the floating jellyfish creature that spoke next, and its words changed everything. The translator gave it a soft, almost musical voice. You do not understand the full situation. The blood test that identified you, it did not merely access a database. It sent a signal. Jake frowned. What kind of signal? The creature pulsed brighter. A genetic activation key. Embedded in your DNA is a code that has been dormant for 10 millennia. When the scanner read your blood, it broadcast that code across quantum channels that span the entire galaxy. You did not just prove you are an heir. You woke something up. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. General Stone shouted for order, but it took a full minute for the chaos to die down. When it finally did, Keth the historian was standing again, his scales now a pale, sickly yellow. Fear. Is this confirmed? He asked the jellyfish creature. It is. Valtorian installations are activating across known space. We have reports from 17 different systems. Ancient facilities that have been dormant and sealed for thousands of years are suddenly coming online. Defense satellites powering up. Weapons platforms charging. Gates to locations we cannot identify beginning to open. A human Admiral Jake didn't recognize pulled up a holographic star map. Red dots were appearing across it, dozens of them, scattered throughout the galaxy. These are confirmed Valtorian sites that have activated in the last 24 hours. And these, more dots appeared, these ones orange, are energy signatures we're detecting that match Valtorian technology, but we didn't know anything was there. There had to be hundreds of orange dots. Jake felt like the room was spinning. Why? Why would scanning my blood do that? Ketha's scales shifted through several colors before settling on something between blue and gray. Because the Valtorians were preparing for something. They built fail-safes. Contingencies. They hid their heirs among primitive species across the galaxy, encoded their bloodlines with activation sequences, and created automated systems that would trigger if those heirs were ever discovered. The historian paused, his next words barely a whisper. They were not running from an enemy they had defeated. They were running from an enemy they could not defeat. And they built a warning system. Ambassador Cole's face had gone pale. You're saying the Valtorians scattered their heirs as insurance. If the heirs were found, if the blood test triggered, it means. She couldn't finish. The jellyfish creature finished for her, its glow dimming to almost nothing. It means the threat is returning. The Valtorians built their systems to activate only when their ancient enemy approached the galaxy again. Your discovery is not a coincidence or good fortune. It is a warning beacon that has been waiting 10,000 years to sound. General Stone stood up, her command voice cutting through the rising panic. How long do we have? An insectoid alien that hadn't spoken yet clicked its mandibles. Its translator gave it a buzzing, urgent tone. Our deep space monitoring stations detected gravitational anomalies at the galactic rim 6 hours ago. Massive distortions in space-time, moving inward. Based on their speed and trajectory, they will reach inhabited systems within weeks. Maybe days. Jake looked around at all these powerful people and beings, all these representatives of civilizations that span the stars, and saw the same thing on every face, human or alien. They were terrified. And somehow, impossibly, they were all looking at him like he was supposed to have an answer. What am I supposed to do? Jake asked quietly. Ketha's scales shifted to a deep purple. Respect, according to the briefing. You are supposed to save us, heir of the Valtorians. That is why you were hidden. That is why you were found. The question is whether you were found in time. They took Jake to Frontier Station Delta, humanity's furthest outpost at the edge of explored space. The station orbited a dead moon that had been nothing but rocks and ice for billions of years. But 3 days after Jake's blood test, something impossible happened. A structure materialized in orbit right next to the station. Not arrived. Not jumped in through faster than light travel. It simply appeared, like it had been there all along and reality just decided to notice it. The structure was massive. It dwarfed the station, dwarfed most human cities. A citadel made of materials that looked like crystal and metal fused together, glowing with a soft golden light that seemed to come from within. Scans couldn't penetrate its hull. Radio signals bounced off without echo. It just floated there, waiting, and somehow Jake knew in his bones that it was waiting for him. Captain Mike Torres led the security team that would escort Jake to the Citadel. Mike was a good guy, career military, the kind of officer who actually cared about his people. He'd pulled Jake aside before they left the shuttle bay and spoken quietly. "Listen, nobody knows what's inside that thing. If anything feels wrong, if you want to bail, you just say the word and we're out. I don't care what the generals ordered. You're still human and you're still one of us." Jake appreciated that more than he could say. The shuttle approached the Citadel slowly, and Jake could see scientists and military personnel crowded against every window of the station, watching. Representatives from a dozen alien species were there too, all of them monitoring the situation, all of them desperate to know what humanity's accidental prince would find inside the ancient structure. The Citadel had no obvious entrance, just smooth walls that reflected their shuttle lights back at them. But as they got closer, Jake felt something. A pulling sensation, like a thread connected to his chest was being gently tugged. "There," he said, pointing to a section of wall that looked identical to every other section. The pilot gave him an uncertain look but adjusted course. As their shuttle came within 50 feet of the spot Jake indicated, the wall changed. Panels that had been seamless suddenly showed seams. Light traced patterns that looked almost like circuitry, forming the shape of a massive doorway. The doors opened silently, revealing a hangar bay that could have held 20 shuttles their size. They landed in silence. The air quality sensors showed breathable atmosphere, which shouldn't have been possible after 10,000 years of sitting dormant. Jake stepped out of the shuttle onto a floor that looked like polished obsidian but felt warm under his boots. Emergency lights clicked on throughout the hangar, bathing everything in that same golden glow. Mike and his team formed up around Jake, weapons ready, but there was nothing threatening here. Just emptiness and the weight of ages. The interior corridor stretched ahead of them, wide enough to drive a tank through. The walls were covered in symbols and writing that Jake couldn't read, but something about them felt familiar. Like a song he'd heard in childhood but couldn't quite remember. They walked for what felt like miles, passing sealed doors and darkened rooms. Every light they passed activated as Jake approached and dimmed after he passed, like the station was tracking his movement. They found rooms that might have been living quarters, vast chambers that could have been meeting halls, and laboratories filled with equipment that humanity's best scientists would spend lifetimes trying to understand. But Jake kept moving forward, following that pulling sensation in his chest. It led him to the heart of the Citadel, to a chamber so large that their portable lights couldn't reach the ceiling. In the center of the chamber stood something that could only be a throne. It was simple, almost plain, made of the same crystal metal material as everything else. But it radiated importance. Above it, suspended in midair, was a hologram. Not projecting, just hanging there like it had been waiting in that exact spot for millennia. Jake approached slowly. The hologram showed a figure, humanoid but clearly not human. Taller, with features that were almost familiar but subtly wrong. Elegant and alien and somehow sad. When Jake came within 10 feet of the throne, the hologram activated fully. The figure moved, turning to face him, and began to speak. The language was nothing Jake had ever heard, flowing and musical and completely incomprehensible. But then something happened. The words started making sense, like his brain was learning the language in real time, or maybe remembering it. "To our heir, across the ages and stars," the hologram said, and Jake understood. "If you are seeing this, then our greatest fear has come to pass. We did not die. We did not fall to conquest or plague or the slow decay of time. We ran. We fled. And we left you behind to face what we could not." The figure's expression was filled with regret. "Let me show you why." Jake felt compelled to touch the throne. His hand moved almost on its own, fingers making contact with the smooth surface. The moment he touched it, the world disappeared. Images flooded his mind, memories that weren't his own, information encoded directly into his genetic code and now unlocking all at once. He saw the Valtorian civilization at its peak, beautiful cities on hundreds of worlds, ships that moved between stars like birds between trees. He saw them discover something at the edge of the galaxy, something that existed in the space between dimensions. The Void Swarm. That's what the Valtorians called them. Not beings exactly, but entities that existed to consume. They fed on matter, on energy, on life itself. They had devoured galaxies beyond counting, leaving nothing but empty void in their wake. The Valtorians fought them. They threw everything they had at the swarm. Their weapons could crack planets, their shields could withstand stars. None of it mattered. The swarm adapted to everything, consumed everything, grew stronger with every battle. The Valtorians realized they couldn't win. But they could buy time. They could hide their knowledge, their technology, their very bloodline. They scattered air candidates across thousands of primitive worlds, encoding their genetic code with everything needed to fight the swarm. The heirs would mature slowly, hidden among species that weren't advanced enough to detect them. And when the swarm returned, as the Valtorians knew it eventually would, the hidden bloodlines would activate. A final gambit across 10,000 years. Jake gasped as he pulled his hand away from the throne, stumbling backward. Mike caught him, steadying him. "You okay? What did you see?" Jake's head was spinning with information, with memories of a civilization that fell before humanity existed. But one memory stood out above all others. "They chose us," he whispered. "The Valtorians scattered air candidates on thousands of worlds, but they marked humanity as special. They saw something in our ancestors, something stubborn and resilient. They bet everything on human survival instincts." An alarm started blaring throughout the citadel. Screens that Jake hadn't even noticed before lit up on the walls, showing star maps and sensor data. Lieutenant Amy Cross, who'd been monitoring communications, shouted across the chamber. "Captain Torres, we're getting emergency broadcasts from the station. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple gravitational anomalies at the system's edge." Mike's face went hard. "The swarm?" Amy nodded, her voice shaking. "Contact in 48 hours. They're coming, and they're coming fast." Jake looked at the throne, at the hologram of the ancient Valtorian ruler who'd made impossible choices to give the galaxy a fighting chance. He thought about humanity, barely 2 centuries into space travel, suddenly holding the key to fighting an enemy that had destroyed civilizations 1,000 times more advanced. It should have been terrifying. It should have been hopeless. But Jake felt something else rising in his chest. Something very human. Spite. The universe thought humanity would roll over? Thought some cosmic horror could just waltz in and take Earth without a fight? "Tell the station to prepare for combat," Jake said, his voice steady. "And someone get me a connection to Earth Command. If the Valtorians left us their weapons, then it's time we learned how to use them." The void swarm hit the outer colonies like a nightmare made real. 3 settlements, gone in hours. Just gone. No debris, no survivors, nothing but empty space where millions of people had been living their lives. The galactic communication networks lit up with panic. Species that had been bickering over trade routes and territorial disputes for decades suddenly realized none of that mattered anymore. An extinction-level threat was carving its way through inhabited space, and it was accelerating. Jake found himself at the center of the largest military mobilization in galactic history. They'd set up a command center on the Valtorian Citadel, using systems that were waking up in response to his presence. Every day brought new installations online. A weapons platform near the Centauri system activated and began charging power cells that had been dormant since before humans discovered agriculture. A fleet of automated defense drones emerged from a hidden facility in the Andromeda sector. Ancient shields started projecting around key systems, barriers that could theoretically withstand almost anything. But there was a problem. Every single piece of Valtorian technology required Jake's presence or his blood to activate. He couldn't be everywhere at once. They tried workarounds, tried to copy his genetic signature, tried to reverse engineer the security protocols. Nothing worked. The Valtorians had built their fail-safes too well. Jake had to personally travel to each installation, place his hand on activation panels, let scanners verify his DNA. It was taking too long. Admiral Tom Bradley coordinated the military response from Earth. He was old-school Navy, a man who'd served on the first human vessels to leave the solar system. During a secure video call, he looked exhausted. "Jake, we've got installations activating in 40 different systems. By the time you reach each one, turn them on, and move to the next, the swarm will be at Earth. We need another solution." Jake knew the Admiral was right, but he didn't have an answer. The genetic memories from the Citadel had given him knowledge, but not omniscience. The political situation was getting worse too. Most alien species had rallied behind the defensive effort, but not all. Some governments wanted to capture Jake, study him, maybe dissect him to unlock the Valtorian technology for themselves. The KIYLL Confederation formally requested that Jake be placed in their protective custody, which everyone understood meant they wanted control of him. The Methian Coalition suggested even more coldly that sacrificing one human to save trillions through genetic analysis was a logical choice. Earth's response to those suggestions had been diplomatic but firm. Any attempt to take Jake by force would be considered an act of war. Other species went the opposite direction. A religious sect among the Eldari started worshipping Jake as a prophesied savior, sending thousands of pilgrims to wherever he was stationed. They'd bow and chant and offer gifts, which was honestly more uncomfortable than the people who wanted to dissect him. Jake was just a guy from Detroit who joined the military because he had no other options. He wasn't anybody's messiah. Through all of it, Jake tried to stay grounded. Colonel Jennifer Hayes, who'd been assigned as his personal security chief, found him one night sitting alone in the Citadel's observation deck. The view showed stars in every direction, and somewhere out there, the swarm was getting closer. Jennifer sat down next to him without asking. "You doing okay?" Jake shrugged. "I keep thinking about the people in those colonies. Families. Kids. Just living their lives, and then nothing. And everyone's looking at me like I'm supposed to stop it." Jennifer nodded slowly. "You know what makes humans dangerous? Not our technology or our weapons. It's that we don't know when to quit. Every species out there, they're doing calculations, running probabilities, trying to figure out if survival is statistically likely. Humans don't work that way. We see impossible odds and we get stubborn." That conversation stuck with Jake. Because Jennifer was right. Earth's military command wasn't approaching this like a math problem. They were approaching it like a fight, and humans were really good at fighting. Major Chris Webb, leading a marine company, had volunteered for a crazy mission to board a swarm construct with nothing but conventional weapons and demo charges. He didn't ask about survival odds. He just asked where to aim. Captain Nicole Grant was retrofitting civilian vessels with Valtorian shield generators, turning cruise ships and cargo haulers into makeshift warships. It violated every safety regulation ever written, and she didn't care. Jake realized something during his 5th week of racing around the galaxy activating installations. The Valtorians had been an advanced civilization, elegant and sophisticated. They'd approached the swarm like a problem to be solved with superior technology and careful strategy. Humanity didn't have that luxury. Humans approached impossible problems by throwing everything at them and refusing to die. It wasn't elegant. But maybe that's exactly what the Valtorians had been counting on. Meanwhile, other heirs were waking up. The genetic code wasn't unique to Jake. The Valtorians had scattered dozens of bloodlines across the galaxy. A dock worker on a mining colony suddenly discovered she was an heir. A scientist studying alien artifacts turned out to have the royal DNA. A mercenary, a teacher, a farmer, all carrying fragments of the ancient bloodline. Some were human. Most weren't. They started gathering at the Citadel, drawn by the same instinct that had led Jake to the throne. But Jake found something troubling in the genetic memories that kept unlocking in his mind. The original Valtorian emperor, in his final act before the civilization scattered, had encoded a weapon into the royal bloodline itself. Not a device or a ship, but something woven into their very DNA. It was called the final resonance. If activated, it would release an energy pulse across quantum channels that the swarm used to coordinate their attacks. The pulse would disrupt them, tear apart their dimensional anchoring, potentially destroy the entire invasion force. The catch was brutal. The weapon required the complete consumption of the heir's life force. Not death exactly, but total genetic dissolution. The heir who activated it would cease to exist on every level, scattered across dimensions with no possibility of recovery. One life to save trillions. The Valtorians had built it as an absolute last resort, gambling that an heir desperate enough would make the sacrifice. Jake kept this knowledge to himself. He didn't tell Admiral Bradley or Colonel Hayes or any of the other heirs. Because he knew how this was supposed to go. The noble sacrifice. The one life given to save everyone else. It was a good story, the kind that got told for generations. But something about it bothered him. The Valtorians had been brilliant, no doubt. But they'd lost. They'd run. They'd hidden. Maybe their way wasn't the only way. Maybe there was a human solution that didn't require dying heroically. The swarm reached the inner systems. Battle reports came in constantly. Defensive lines holding, then breaking. Casualties mounting. Valtorian weapons took a toll on the swarm entities, but for every one destroyed, 3 more appeared. The automated defenses helped, but they weren't enough. Nothing was enough. The swarm adapted to everything thrown at them, evolved in real time, consumed the wreckage of destroyed ships to build more of themselves. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brown sent a message from the front lines that changed everything. His unit had been overrun, surrounded, minutes from being consumed. In desperation, he jury-rigged a Valtorian phase cannon with a mining laser and random components from a destroyed transport. The hybrid weapon shouldn't have worked. It violated every principle of both technologies. But when he fired it at a swarm entity, something unexpected happened. The entity didn't just die. It destabilized, its matter scattering like it couldn't hold itself together. Kyle's garbled message included sensor data, and Jake saw it. The swarm had adapted to Valtorian weapons. They hadn't adapted to human improvisation mixed with Valtorian technology. Jake called an emergency meeting with every commanding officer in the fleet. His idea was insane. His plan was impossible. And when he finished explaining it, Admiral Bradley just stared at him for a long moment before starting to laugh. It was the laugh of a man who'd seen too much and didn't care about protocol anymore. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," the Admiral said. "Which means it might actually work. No alien species would ever try something that stupid." Jake grinned. "Exactly. The plan was absolutely crazy, and that's exactly why Jake thought it might work. Instead of activating the final resonance and sacrificing himself like the Valtorians intended, he was going to do something the ancient civilization never considered. He was going to give away the key. All of it. To everyone." Admiral Bradley stood in front of the War Council, human and alien officers filling the command center. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," the Admiral said, rubbing his temples. "You want to broadcast your complete genetic code across every military and civilian network in Allied space. You want to temporarily give billions of people access to Valtorian technology that we barely understand. Technology that's been locked behind royal bloodline security for 10,000 years. Jake nodded. "That's right, sir." An alien commander from the Dravian Collective, a species known for tactical brilliance, made a sound like grinding stone. His translator converted it to disbelief. "This is tactically insane. You would be surrendering your only advantage. The swarm expects centralized command, expects us to protect you as a strategic asset. If everyone has access to the technology, you become irrelevant." Jake met his eyes. "Exactly. And that's going to save us." Colonel Jennifer Hayes understood first. Jake could see it click in her expression. The swarm adapts to patterns. They've been watching us protect Jake, watching us funnel everything through him. They've adapted their tactics to target him specifically. But if suddenly everyone is Jake, if everyone has access to the weapons and shields and tech. She smiled grimly. They won't know what hit them. Another alien representative, insectoid and cautious, clicked nervously. "But the security protocols exist for a reason. The Valtorians locked their technology behind genetic codes because they knew how dangerous it was in untrained hands. If you give this power to everyone, people will die from accidents. From mistakes." Jake didn't flinch. "People are already dying. 3 colonies gone. Defensive fleets destroyed. The swarm is consuming everything in its path. Yeah, some people might hurt themselves with tech they don't understand. But humans have been picking up dangerous things we barely understand and figuring them out on the fly since we discovered fire. That's kind of our specialty." Admiral Bradley was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his staff. "How fast can we set this up?" A communications officer looked stunned that they were actually doing this. "Sir, if we use every broadcast array, every satellite network, every quantum relay station, we could push the genetic data to all Allied networks within 6 hours." The Admiral nodded. "Do it. And someone get me a connection to every civilian network too. Commercial, educational, entertainment, everything. If this is going to work, we need saturation coverage." The Alien Council erupted in argument. Some species thought it was brilliant. Others thought it was suicide. A few thought it violated so many protocols that they wanted to formally object. But Earth's fleet was the largest single military force present, and more importantly, Jake was human. This was his call to make. Admiral Bradley made it clear that Earth was moving forward with or without consensus. Most of the alien fleets decided to go along with it, if only because there were no better options. 6 hours later, Jake sat in a medical scanner while technicians worked frantically around him. They were mapping every strand of his DNA, every genetic marker, every piece of code the Valtorians had hidden in his bloodline. The data package they created was massive, billions of data points that would normally take specialized equipment and trained geneticists to interpret. But they weren't sending it to geneticists. They were sending it to everyone. Lieutenant Amy Cross handled the broadcast coordination. "We're ready on all channels. This is going to every human military vessel, every colony, every outpost. Allied alien fleets are receiving it too. Civilian networks are standing by." She looked at Jake. "Once we send this, there's no taking it back. Everyone will have what you have." Jake took a deep breath. "Send it." The genetic code broadcast across human space like a wave. Every soldier, every civilian, every person with access to any kind of network terminal suddenly had Jake's DNA template downloading into compatible systems. Valtorian technology that had been locked and dormant began recognizing the genetic signature everywhere at once. A mechanic on Mars suddenly found that the Valtorian shield generator she'd been studying for weeks activated at her touch. A cargo pilot near Jupiter discovered his ship's Valtorian weapons systems coming online. On Earth, in military academies and research centers and even high schools with science programs, ancient technology started responding to human users. It was chaos at first. People had no idea what they were doing. An engineer in Denver accidentally activated a Valtorian construction drone and it started building something in his garage before he figured out how to shut it down. A teenager in Seoul triggered a holographic interface and suddenly had access to star charts showing systems humanity had never heard of. But humans adapted fast. That's what humans did. Within hours, people were sharing information, posting tutorials, figuring out through trial and error how the technology worked. The swarm hit Earth's outer defense perimeter 3 days later. They came in massive numbers, reality itself seeming to tear as they emerged from dimensional space. Dark entities that looked like oil-given predatory life, flowing through space and consuming everything they touched. Earth's conventional fleet engaged first, buying time. Ships died by the dozens. But then something happened that the swarm hadn't encountered in thousands of years across countless galaxies. The swarm adapted to Valtorian weapons. They'd done it during the original war 10,000 years ago. But suddenly they weren't facing pure Valtorian technology. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brown's improvised hybrid weapon had shown the way. Now millions of humans were doing the same thing, combining Valtorian tech with human engineering in ways that made no sense, that violated every rule, that shouldn't have worked but did. A mining crew retrofitted their ore processor with a Valtorian energy core and created a weapon that fired superheated asteroids. A research station combined their particle accelerator with Valtorian phase technology and punched holes in swarm entities from across the solar system. The swarm couldn't adapt fast enough. Every time they evolved to counter one hybrid weapon, humans invented 5 more variations. It was tactical chaos, no coordination, no standardization, just millions of people improvising and fighting with everything they had. Any military strategist would have called it disaster. But it worked. The swarm's advantage had always been adaptation. They studied their enemies, learned their patterns, evolved counters. You couldn't do that when the enemy had no patterns, when every single fighter was doing something different. Jake wasn't sitting in a command center watching. He was in a fighter cockpit, part of the defensive line. Colonel Hayes had tried to stop him, but he'd pulled rank, an authority he technically had as the Valtorian heir. If everyone else was risking everything, he wasn't going to hide. His fighter squadron included other heirs who'd woken up over the past weeks. None of them were particularly special anymore, not now that everyone had access to the genetic code. They were just soldiers fighting for survival. The battle raged for 18 hours. The swarm kept coming, pouring through their dimensional rifts, but the Allied fleets held. Not because they had superior technology or better tactics, but because they refused to break. Human Marines boarded swarm constructs in suicide runs, finding their cores and tearing them apart from the inside. When shields failed, ships rammed swarm entities, crews sacrificing themselves to take out targets. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't sophisticated. It was brutal and desperate and very, very human. Captain Nicole Grant, commanding one of the retrofitted civilian vessels she'd converted to a warship, managed something nobody thought possible. Her crew figured out how to reverse the polarity on a Valtorian tractor beam, and instead of pulling objects toward them, it pushed with massive force. They used it to shove a swarm entity directly into a dimensional rift. The entity destabilized, and the rift collapsed, cutting off one of the swarm's entry points. Within an hour, every ship with a tractor beam was trying the same trick. The tide turned somewhere around hour 20. The swarm wasn't retreating exactly, but they weren't advancing anymore either. Their adaptation protocols, honed across millions of years, couldn't keep up with the sheer creative chaos humanity brought to the fight. And humans weren't alone. Alien crews, inspired or maybe infected by human stubbornness, started improvising too. A Dravian commander combined his species' biological weapons with Valtorian energy shields to create containment fields that trapped swarm entities and dissolved them. An Eldari science vessel used their meditation amplifiers with Valtorian sensors to predict where swarm entities would emerge before they fully materialized. By hour 30, the swarm began withdrawing. Not destroyed, but driven back beyond the galactic rim. The dimensional rifts collapsed one by one. The vast, Ancient entities that had devoured civilizations beyond counting had met something they couldn't consume. Not superior technology. Not tactical brilliance. Just pure, stubborn refusal to die. Jake landed his fighter back on the Citadel, exhausted and running on fumes. The command center was celebrating, but he could see the casualty reports scrolling across screens. Thousands of ships lost. Millions dead. Entire defensive platforms destroyed. Victory, but at a terrible cost. Admiral Bradley found him staring at the numbers. "We held," the Admiral said quietly. "Because of you. Because you gave away the key instead of hoarding it." Jake shook his head. "The Valtorians left me a weapon that would have killed me to use it. I just remembered that humans don't really do the whole noble sacrifice thing when we can find a more stubborn way to win." In the weeks that followed, the galaxy changed. The Valtorian installations remained active, but they weren't exclusive anymore. Knowledge that had been locked for 10,000 years was now shared. Jake formally declined any claim to the Valtorian throne or empire. There would be no new dynasty, no royal bloodline ruling from ancient citadels. Instead, he helped establish what they called the Galactic Commonwealth. Not an empire, but an alliance of species working together, with humanity not as rulers but as partners. Jake went back to active duty. Still technically a corporal, though nobody really knew how to handle his rank anymore. He served on defensive platforms at the Galactic Rim, watching for any sign the swarm might return. He got messages sometimes from people across human space, folks who'd used the genetic code broadcast to activate Valtorian tech, save their ships, protect their families. They'd thank him for sharing instead of keeping the power to himself. Colonel Hayes asked him once if he regretted it, giving away the one thing that made him special. Jake thought about it. Thought about those 3 colonies that vanished before anyone could help them. Thought about all the people who'd lived because millions of others could fight instead of waiting for one person to save them. "The blood test said I was special," he told her. "But it turns out the most human thing I could do was make sure I wasn't." The Valtorian Citadel still floated at the edge of human space, a monument to a civilization that had tried to save the galaxy through one perfect heir. Humanity saved it by making everyone the heir. It wasn't the elegant solution. But it was the one that worked.